Do you yearn for travel that involves outdoor adventure and learning? I do. I also have a passion for all things farming and agriculture. I've traveled to exotic jungles to learn about growing chocolate. I even once owned my own organic vegetable and sunflower farm. And now I'm planning my journey back to agriculture. Agritourism, defined as travel that involves some type of agricultural experience. Agritourism is all about entertaining. But the marketing strategist in me knows that at its core, agritourism is really about educating, and education affects change. My future farm needs to deliver a profound experience to all of its visitors. It needs to educate people about food, health, and climate. Join me to learn from experienced agritourism farmers and entrepreneurs and help me build my future farm strategy. And who knows, maybe one day soon you'll find yourself in a tropical jungle cutting open cacao pods with a machete, or savoring an outdoor plant-to-plate community dinner with 100 guests at a farm in Illinois. So let's tap into the agritourist in you. Meg and Laura founded Full Well Farm, located in Adams, Massachusetts, in 2018. Meg was brought up on the farmland they are now farming on. When chatting with Meg about their background, there seemed to be an initial resistance to farming and becoming a farmer. However, the pull to being outside every March was too hard to resist, and the pull to developing a business that provided access to healthy food was also too much to resist. Hence, although there were some twists and turns along the journey, the evolution of Full Well Farm was inevitable, and I am certainly grateful for that. And I am sure the local Northern Berkshire community is as well. Meg and Laura have developed a farm with a focus on CSA, community-supported agriculture, with both vegetables and flowers. Full Well Farm is also supporting several food access organizations that have figured out ways to fund their farmers while feeding the community. To quote Meg and Laura about their farm, "Community drives everything we do at Full Well Farm. Our business model is rooted in social justice and the belief that everybody has the right to high-quality produce. As a LGBTQIA+ and women-owned farm, we strive to create a safe space in our community for all identities. This is a very important time to listen to our farmers. Figure out how you can help support their sustenance and growth, and take the necessary action to do just that. When it comes to Full Well Farm, check out their CSA options and sign up today." This is Jen Ross, your AgriTourist podcast host. Enjoy my conversation with Meg, one of the founders and farmers from Full Well Farm. Welcome, Meg, from Full Well Farm. So, Meg, tell me about you and your background. I want to learn a little bit about your backstory.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me on the podcast. I should have just mentioned this in our intro, but I did a little agricultural podcast back in the day myself, because I have a little background in like communications when I was an English major, so really putting the liberal arts to good use as a farmer.
Terrific.
But yeah, so I'm so excited to chat. I love talking about farming. Yeah.
What was the podcast about?
I was farming and landscaping, and I did interviews with people in food and agriculture. So I talked to an herbalist, I talked to a chef, and it wasn't very long lived, but I did have like a handful of really great conversations with some folks in the Pioneer Valley. Yeah.
Excellent. It's very inspiring, to connect with people like yourself. It keeps my energy going, and especially if you're trying to pursue something, it kind of energizes you to talk to like-minded people. So tell me about you.
Full Well Farm is in the Berkshires, up in Adams, so the northwest corner, like right near the Vermont and New York border. And I grew up on the land where we are farming. So I actually lived next door to the house where I grew up, because my grandparents owned and operated a dairy farm for 40 years. And which makes me a 6th-generation farmer in the Berkshires. Yes.
Wow. I'm impressed. I didn't realize you grew up on the property.
Yeah, yeah. So Fullwell is not the family business. It was started and founded in 2018 by myself and my business partner, Laura Tupper. But the property is owned by my mom. We have a lease with her to like rent the land. And yeah, I grew up around the dairy cows and access to this like beautiful property. So
So, what was it like growing up in the area, in this specific area of the Berkshires, and in the farming industry?
I definitely, as I mentioned, I was an English major in college and I actually went to Williams. So I
Oh,
really just
you
haven't been able
stayed
to leave the
local.
Berkshires. At 18, that was like my worst nightmare, but I made it, but it's a great school, obviously. So we made it work. But yeah, I would say like the farming industry that I grew up with was not a very positive one in that like I watched, I don't know if you know anything about the dairy industry in New England, but as dairy has moved to like be further mechanized and like, most of America's like milk comes from like huge, huge agriculture out in the Midwest. So New England dairies have really struggled in the last 50 years. And so in my lifetime, I kind of just watched the decline of my grandparents' business from what was once like a thriving dairy that was, selling milk to like large national cheese brands to like basically just my grandfather retiring with like a pretty small herd. So, yeah, my relationship to agriculture definitely wasn't one that I thought was going to become a career. And in fact, I did a project in college about my grandfather and he died of cancer and when I was in college and about like the farm and his cancer and it was kind of a photo project but it was very like depressing like in my clearly my perspective of agriculture at that time was a bit sad was like looking at this farm and the farms around me in the Berkshires as like being in a period of decline.
Wow. Okay, so
Hmm.
then how did you take that emotion and that view of agriculture and make that transition to what you're doing today?
Yeah, so in college, I did an internship in upstate New York on Lake Champlain with a farm called Essex Farm. And they actually have,
I know
yeah,
I don't
the
know her
dirty life.
personally, but I read the book
Yes.
and I am on her newsletter.
Okay. Yeah,
Great
they're
story.
Kristen and Mark. Yes, they have a book called The Dirty Life, and I was interning for a different organization in their town, doing like what was kind of more like media related work with young farmers. And I ended up nannying for their girls. So I didn't work for Mark, but I spent a lot of time on their farm and had a CSA that summer. And that was the first time that I saw what I think now we would call like regenerative agriculture and the like young farmer movement. So I was specifically like working and living in a community where there was a lot of people under 40 who were starting farms and getting involved in agriculture. I was, eating the nearest grocery store was like 40 minutes away. I was like eating almost exclusively like locally produced food and I just kind of fell in love with it. So seeing like their farm and the community that they've built in that area, I really was just like, wow, like you can put your values into practice. And it was the first time that I had really seen a community like getting behind local agriculture in that way. So I kind of just never really looked back after that. I spent the summer there and then came back, was still an English major, but like tried to do some like local volunteer work on farms. And then when I graduated, I started farming that summer. I did my first like farming internship on a vegetable farm in Michigan the summer after I graduated and spent some time in Scotland doing some like volunteer kind of woofing
I was going
farming.
to say, did you woof?
Yeah, I wasn't officially a woofer, but I had
Yeah.
studied abroad in Scotland, so I went back to Scotland after graduation to do some farming there. And I was the only like woofer who was trying to like farm in Scotland in like November. It wasn't a very popular time to be farming in Scotland.
That's pretty intense.
Yeah. I really love Edinburgh, and I was seeing someone at the time who lived there, so I was like committed to being back in Scotland and committed to agriculture, so was willing to like work in the rain if that's what they needed me to do.
Hey, it's Jen. I need to interrupt this podcast episode to talk about two really important topics: farms and food. This will be quick. Here's the situation. Small farms face increasing expenses. Funding for farms and nonprofits has an uncertain future. Labor shortages and climate change are a constant factor. At the same time, over 10% of our country's population are single seniors living alone. It's impossible for many of these community members to shop at farmers markets and purchase fresh local foods. These community members lose out, and so do the farmers. So when I hear about business models that help both the farmer and the community member alike, I want to spread the word, and I really hope that these models are looked at and replicated. Heart and Soil Collective is a Berkshire-based nonprofit that purchases produce directly from small farms and delivers this produce to local homes at no cost. They are feeding the farmer and they are feeding the community member. On March 15th, Heart and Soil Collective launched a crowdfunding campaign called Locally Grown to Local Homes. This important campaign funds their community produce and soup programs. The goal? To raise $60,000 to pay local farmers for their produce and to deliver to local homes, and also to make soups delivered in the winter. Heart and Soil needs your help. Click on the link in our bio, go to the heartbeatfarms.com website, or check out the podcast notes to contribute to their crowdfunding campaign. And if you can't contribute, then just find a local farm and become a regular customer. We need to stay focused on supporting our local farms and strengthening our regional food systems. Thank you for the listen and enjoy the rest of the podcast episode. So from your experience upstate New York, to your internships in Scotland, what was percolating for you? Like, what was coming to the surface with all of this?
I think like a personal commitment to wanting to invest in it as a career. So after I got back from Scotland, I applied for like a year-long apprenticeship where I was like working full time. And so I kind of felt like I had dipped my toes in for a couple seasons, and I was like, I'm ready to like commit to this as a career. I want to spend all my time doing this. Like I'm ready to learn. And also just the awareness that it was a way of life and a movement that had support, that there were communities that, wanted to buy like organic food that was grown locally. And that's something that I at Fullwell see as a right and not a privilege. And so just like experiencing that and getting a taste for that really just inspired wanting to do that work. And I would say the other thing was just like getting to work outside definitely was hard to come back from. Like I did after a couple years, like I worked in journalism in the winter, and farming in New England is seasonal often. So I would often have a different kind of job in the winter time. And every time like exactly this kind of time of year came around, like March, I was always like, oh my God, I have to get back outside. Like I cannot stay at this desk job. So I tried other careers like a little bit, and then like I never made it past March.
That's funny.
Yeah.
So you apprenticed for a year. Was that in the Berkshires?
It was in the Pioneer Valley at a farm called Crimson and Clover in Northampton. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So then how did you transition to your own property? Like how did that come about? And what was the vision? Because obviously there's several models out there of how you can farm and how you can create income from a farm. What was the thinking there?
That's a great question. So I apprenticed for a year, and then I worked another full season after that as just an hourly employee at a different farm in the Pioneer Valley. And then I did some like organic landscaping for a couple summers after that because, agriculture is a hard industry to make a living doing. So I tried landscaping because I was like, maybe what I like is working outside and we'll like see how this other career goes. And it definitely just felt like it was lacking the kind of, I don't want to say spiritual, but like the values based part of it that I had fallen in love with. Even though I was getting to work outside, I was often working, for like elite clients who could afford landscapers, and I wasn't getting to like feed people, feed my community. I had, gotten the experience of what it's like to get to and do some food access work at some of these farms, and I really missed that feeling. So
Yeah.
I was kind of doing a smattering of things, but
You were trying to get away from it a little bit, but it always seems to
ex-
pull you back. I know that feeling.
100%. Yeah, exactly.
Because every time I'd be like, oh,
Yep.
don't do that. It's too hard.
Yep.
It's going to suck you in. And then I just get pulled right back in.
That's exactly right. Yep. And I met my business partner, Laura, at Kitchen Garden, which is the farm in Sunderland where I worked as an hourly employee. And she and I had different like management positions together and then also went on to landscape together. And I just knew she was like in the same boat. Like I knew she was someone who like consistently just didn't feel satisfied by other work. So what was happening in the background of this is that, my grandfather died in 2013 when I was graduating college. And my brother, Zach, who is a year and a half younger than me, actually left college to come back to the farm to help my grandmother and my mom to like manage the farm because basically my grandfather passed away with like no plan in place about like what happens next. And the property that is Burnett Farm, which is the dairy farm, and the land is called that my mom owns, is large. It's about 500 acres of like
Oh, wow.
farmable land, most of which is in hay production for like at the time was for the dairy herd, and then there's pasture and a decent amount of like unfarmable like forest land. So my brother came back to the farm to help do at least the hay side of things and keep the taxes paid. And they did a bit of like a family business for a couple years. And then eventually in 2000 and like the end of 2017, he left. And I kind of felt like there was an opportunity after he left to maybe go back and do something. And simultaneously I was feeling kind of stuck in my career of like, well, landscaping's okay, but like I don't really want to go back to hourly employment at another farm. And I think I just have a bit of an entrepreneurial spirit and felt like if agriculture is going to be my career, working for myself just felt like the obvious choice for me personally. So yeah, I started I always joke that I like proposed to Laura a bit. We aren't together romantically. We're just, we're friends, but like we in many ways we're just as connected as a married couple because like
Yes.
we're very financially tied as business partners. And I like have this really distinct memory of the spring of 2018, like going on a walk and being like, so do you want to open a farm with me? She said yes. So we started like scheming in 2018, and I was farming at Kitchen Garden at the time. So I was like,
Let me ask you
yeah,
a question about that.
yeah.
What made you want to work with a partner on the farm? Did you feel that obviously you both had the passion, but what do you each uniquely bring to the table? Because, good partnerships work well when you have a balance of skills. So just curious what was attracting you about her and her skill set and obviously I know her passion and what, that you felt that you guys were aligned that way.
hmm Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I definitely knew because I had a couple of years of experience in agriculture that I didn't want to farm alone. I like didn't think it was possible. And I also wasn't interested in like the family farm model. So that's partially why I actually didn't go back when that's how Burnett Farm was being run by like my brother and my mom, was
Yeah.
that even though we have great relationships, I just like wasn't really interested in that dynamic. So I kind of knew that if I was going to make it happen, I would need like a business partner. And you said it really well already, that like Laura and I bring very different skill sets and personalities to the table. I knew her both as a coworker and as a co-manager, where I had seen her work at Kitchen Garden as the harvest manager when I was as working as the washroom manager. So we had dealt with like stress together and some high pressure situations. So I think that helped a little
Yeah.
bit. Like I knew her more as a manager in addition to as a friend. And yeah, honestly, like at the time, I don't think I knew how well suited our different skill sets were. And as Fullwell has gone on, this is now our seventh season, which is
Oh,
wild.
wow.
Um,
Congratulations. That's
thank you.
terrific.
It's really like our differences are our strengths. So I have a communications background. I've done a little journalism. I've done some like nonprofit comms work in between farming throughout the years. And so like doing a lot of the like customer facing marketing and sales. So I do that side of things. And then I also do the harvest and post harvest management on the farm. And Laura manages the production and like pre harvest. So she's on the farm today with our employee Helen. And it's like, actually, today is like a great day to talk because it's like our first day of 2025, basically. Um, so they're like getting ready to plant, they're weeding, they're, starting seeds. She's managing the greenhouse. So those things have kind of developed through the years that we've decided like where our skills lie. But yeah, also personality wise, like she's, a wonderful Virgo. I don't know if you're into astrology, but highly recommend business owning with a Virgo. She's like
Okay.
wonderfully detail oriented, and like I got her a baseball hat one year that says like spreadsheets on it because she's like very driven by like research, and so she's like so good at like looking up diseases and pests and making plans for how to deal with those. And I feel like my skills lie slightly more in like what I'm doing now, like storytelling, like talking to the customers, like expressing like what we're all about via social media, via our website.
So you started 7 years ago. And when you first started, well, first of all, so you obviously negotiated something with your mother.
Yep.
How many acres? Like what is
Hmm.
going on the property as far as like, does your mother, because that you said it was 500 acres, the old farm.
Yeah.
Does she still have those 500 acres?
Yeah.
That's a
Great
lot of
question.
acres.
Yep. Yeah.
I
So
was like,
I know. So Burnett Farm is what do they call it? In Massachusetts, Burnett Farm is a century farm. So that's a cool distinction where like if the farm has been in existence for more than 100 years, we're in a select, there's only like I think 20 or 30 of us in Massachusetts that have that distinction. So and most of the property is still in hay production. So she basically is the landowner who leases the property to like several different farmers who do different
okay,
projects. So most of the land is in hay production to someone who does hay for horse feed out of like central Mass, and actually just like brings his like huge equipment like 3 times a year, hays the whole property in
wow.
like 3 days, and then leaves.
Wow.
It's really amazing, when I compare it to like growing up with my grandfather who just had like 10 teenagers come for like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
The equipment these days is really sophisticated. And then my uncle, her brother, also has a small beef herd on the farm. So he has worked to like maintain some of the pasture that has gone unused for, a decade or so. And he utilizes like more of the barn structures. And then Fullwell occupies about a 5 acre plot. We have one barn on that plot, and then our main field where our greenhouse is a we probably are doing under 2 acres of actual like farmed land currently, but like manage a larger acre of about 5 acres
Nice.
between like the barn and the road. Yeah.
I have a question on haying, the hay farmers.
Yeah.
I know that sometimes that's can be highly sprayed.
Mm,
So, and you obviously, you know, you grow in a certain manner that's
yep.
very good for the earth and for our
Hmm.
soil. So, does that, are they following good practices? And is that something you've gotten involved in? I would think you would advocate for that.
Hmm. Yeah, they don't farm organically because they use some fertilizer, like a pelleted fertilizer, but they don't do any kind of like weed management actually.
That's good.
But yeah, they yeah, it's not organic feed because I don't think that the fertilizer they use is pelleted, but nothing that could like affect our crops, luckily. We have had that issue actually with there's a town owned solar panel field across the street from us that has been managed with herbicides in recent years, and unfortunately they like started doing that before we were in existence, so we didn't have the chance to like yeah advocate, but
Yeah.
we have done a good amount of communicating with the town about that so that we know, what regulations they're following to make sure that they avoid air spread of that, and we can communicate that with our
Yeah.
customers if they see that happening. And yeah.
It's challenging,
Yeah, it is.
very
Yeah, you don't
challenging.
have control of a lot.
Yeah, I mean, you have like that's when we had our farm here, it was in the middle of a residential neighborhood. It was like this triangle piece of property that was like about 8 acres. And, we had no control we grew everything organically. We were not certified.
Hmm.
We probably would have never been able to get certified. But, you have people, doing their lawns and everything was,
Right.
so there's so much you can control. It's
Hmm.
it's challenging. Okay, so 5 acres.
Yep.
What was the vision when you started? What did you put down on paper that okay, this is this is what we're gonna do? Like, what were you guys thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I often think back on that summer fondly because I was working on another farm and I was doing a smattering of a bunch of jobs, but just spending like every waking minute like envisioning what the farm would look like coming up with the name, like just getting excited about what we wanted. It felt like a real like dreaming
Well, you
time.
mentioned the name, so where did that come from?
Yeah, so we had a friend suggested it, and we went through lots of different names, so many.
It's
And
so hard. It's a very hard thing to
it
do.
is. It's so hard. But the only like guiding principle I had is that I really wanted a name that could also be a logo because I have a bit of this like marketing background. Like I really wanted like the name itself to have like visual impact. And so when a friend suggested Full Well, I realized that that has this like square labeled because they're like three 4 letter words, Full Well Farm. So as soon as I mocked up like those 3 words in a square, I was like, that's it. Because I knew that was what I wanted. And I don't know how that friend like came up with it, but then as soon as we heard it, we were like, you'll be full, you'll be well. Like, and also ironically, at when we started, there wasn't water access at the site where we at the barn and the field where we started, there was no well. So the very first thing we had to plan for in our 2019 for to make 2019 happen was how do we water things. And so it also feels like this amazing kind of forward looking name of like optimism that like
I
we
was
will
gonna
have a
say yes, you
we'll
were
have a
putting it
full
out there.
well. Yeah. um
I love
yeah.
it.
So
That's great.
that was the name. And Laura and I, we, like I mentioned, we met at Kitchen Garden, which is a kind of larger scale organic farm in Sunderland that does mostly wholesale. So I had some experience on like smaller CSA farms. And then at KG, we learned from the original owners, Tim and Caroline, some like they're really amazing business owners. And I think both Laura and I like really benefited from learning from people who took like the business of agriculture really seriously. And, I know that you're interested in that too, like what works. And so they weren't doing a CSA farm, but like we really, learned and talked to people who were like, I'm going to make the finances work. Like, how do we be financially stable? Like they have a sriracha company that is like really, it's available nationally. So we had these great mentors who were taking like the business of agriculture really seriously.
That's great.
But I think at that farm, Laura and I both felt like we weren't in love with the like systems that they were using. Not be like they're organic, so not in that way, but like they were a very large scale tractor sized farm doing like 60 to 80 acres when Laura and I were there. So we both were like, that scale isn't for us. Like both just in terms of like how much we want to manage personally, and because we both had this background in like, doing organic landscaping, and like we really liked more of that like hand scale regenerative no-till model. So when we were dreaming up the farm, I think like the principles of us being a CSA and being no-till were definitely like the first kind of pillars of the business.
Now, why CSA? CSA, I had a CSA, and I did the CSA for 3 solid years. And it was interesting. We broke it out into seasons eventually because there were different types of customers who did not like greens, or they wanted the diversity of the summer. We added a plant-based farm-to-table soup to our CSA because we were working with a certain type of demographic that needed that quick meal, especially for their kids. So it was just interesting as I got to know my customer base, we really were redefining the CSA. We also had a lot of single people who were like, I can't take this, the half share was too much. So we literally created a small share. So, but CSA is challenging because the diversity of you need a diversity of stuff. So what was your thinking going into the CSA? And also, talk to me a little bit about who you're serving. Who is your customer? Because obviously that can make or break a CSA.
Yep. Yeah, great questions. It's so fun to talk with someone who has experience. I'm like, ooh,
yeah, yeah. No, we could probably we'll talk offline a lot more.
Yeah.
I'll come and visit because I would love to just understand your model a bit more. Because CSA, sometimes I'm like, I don't know if I could do that again. But I love hearing from people who are doing it and doing it successfully and how they've evolved it.
Yeah, well, I would say one start of that answer is that the third pillar of how we founded the farm on was the principle of food access. So both Laura and I were like extremely driven to make our food as accessible as possible, and to work with other, organizations in the area to help us to do that. So, the balance is that we don't want to martyr ourselves, like the sustainability of the business and of the agricultural field in general is, essential. We need our food growers to also be sustained, but we like, especially because I grew up here, and I know that like a lot of the Berkshires is not a wealthy area. I think a lot of the Berkshires is identified by the state as being like low income and food deserts, and all of that exists right in the neighborhoods where where I grew up. So I was extremely motivated also because I just knew that like the population of people who I grew up with weren't people who were, kind of like the maybe like typical like bougie CSA purchasers. Like they like people who already know, about local food and can afford it, and like all of those things, which I'm really glad people are making those choices, but also I knew that a lot of people in our community didn't fall into that category. So like how do we bridge the gap between like what we want to grow and being a sustainable business and being able to reach those people.
It's the toughest question.
Yeah.
That's the core of it. That comes
Yep.
down to the core of it. And
Yep.
how are you doing that?
Yeah. So I'm trying to think. We started our first season without a CSA. We just did the farmers market, and both Laura and I kept off-farm jobs because we got some really great advice from another farmer mentor, Jen Salinetti at Woven Roots Farm in down in South County in the Berkshires. We did some mentorship with her and her husband Pete, and they run a very similar like CSA no-till farm. And when we were starting in 2018, we thought that we were going to take out a loan to get the well because we were like, well, we can't grow anything without water. And so we were applying to get like a USDA loan for like $40,000 to do our first season, which was a pretty like high or like, yeah, high, like a kind of high stakes start is it, to have a loan, and that means that we both needed to work full time because we couldn't make enough money to pay back the loan if we weren't working full time. And we had Jen come and give us some advice, and she was just like, don't do that. Like, don't do that. Start smaller. Like, have a season where you're just like dipping your toes in, where you're keeping
Right.
your off-farm jobs, like where you are setting yourself up for success, because like basically anything you grow and sell is going to feel like a win, instead of feeling like, oh God, we didn't sell enough at market and now we can't pay back this loan, or now I can't pay my
Right.
bills. And so, yeah, we took her advice and we did that. And which did mean that we went the first season with no water on site. We like had this whole system with an ATV that I borrowed from my mom, and like a giant tank on a trailer and a pump in the stream. And we would,
Hey, whatever
water.
works.
Yeah.
It's
And I
pretty
think
amazing.
now I think now about the last couple of years where we've had like droughts, and obviously we got lucky with a year that wasn't like the worst rain year ever, but yeah, that was it. We had a tank full of water, and we would water in when we planted, and that was all the water they got from us. And then we like washed vegetables like off site to bring to market. And we both kept off farm jobs, like 2 to 3 days a week off farm. So that was our first season. And I think that was extremely good advice because it did allow us to just feel successful and to start building like brand awareness, or just like, hey, we're here, like before launching the CSA. Like all of that, I think was really valuable. And so in 2020, we were like launching our CSA for the first time. And then everything went crazy. I saw something that was like 5 years ago. This was like the last week that everything was normal.
Wow,
So,
you're right.
yeah,
I didn't even
exactly
think
five
about
years
that.
ago. Yeah. So that we like completely changed our crop plan, post lockdown. But we had a vision to do a box share CSA. So our CSA model is like a pre-packed box, and you can pick that box up at the farm, or you can pick it up at downtown locations in like several different towns. And that model came motivated by food access, because like we live in a rural location with like not great public transport services even at the best of times. So we kind of knew transportation was a barrier to access for a lot of local foods. And also from a marketing standpoint, no one else in the Berkshires was doing a box share. Everyone has that kind of more traditional CSA model where you're like bringing your kids to the farm to pick cherry tomatoes and like pick up
Yeah.
your stuff. And I think we just felt like, I don't know, I feel like there's a customer out there who like really wants veggies but needs more of a convenient model. So we had plans to do the box share already, and then COVID made that extra appealing because we were doing basically like a no contact pickup
Yep.
model where people could just pick up without really seeing us. So we like, yeah, launched into that in 2020 and shifted. Like I think what shifted is that we were planning on doing like a smaller number of CSAs at first and continuing at the market, but then we didn't know if the market was going to be happening. So we shifted more our crops to go through the CSA, even though that was our first CSA season.
And how many did you have that first season?
I want to say like 25 maybe.
That's funny. I had about 30 my first season.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
remember that.
I think we were planning on like half of that, like just like a little, like just a little
Yeah.
taste. But COVID was also a time when people were reminded that our global food system is really insecure and the store shelves were, empty and all that. So I think it was also a time when people were like, oh yeah, like I want to know my farmer, like
Yeah.
I want to know the people in my community who are growing food. And so it was like we had a wait list for our CSAs that year because people were interested. So that was also a good feeling. It was like one of the one of the good things that came out of it was
Yeah.
that it was actually not a bad time for us to be launching a CSA, given the public interest in local food.
Excellent. So how has it evolved since then? And I know you do vegetables and flowers, correct?
Hmm.
So tell me about how has it evolved since then and what does it look like today or
Yeah,
going into
yeah,
this season?
yeah. Yeah, great question. The flowers were also something from the beginning that I was interested in, and I just kind of had a personal interest in it. I never grew flowers before. Like none of the farms I ever worked on did cut flowers really. So I just saw that there were some basically like farms using the regenerative model for flowers. And I was like, that's really cool. I love flowers. And I knew and understood that flowers are valued more monetarily than veggies are. Like the percent that you can make on a bed of flowers is generally higher than vegetables. So when we first started, we thought of the flowers as like a smart business move because they have a higher payout, and not that they literally subsidize some of the vegetables, but that they could help the business to be sustainable while we
Right.
also wanted to do food access work and keep our prices like reasonable for people. So yeah, we started flowers the first year and brought them to market, and we worked with some local florists, and then we started eventually having a seasonal flower CSA where people can sign up for like spring, summer, or fall. And as we have so now on the flower side of things, we don't do any event work. That was something that I initially thought we might get into because the Berkshires is a place where people come for a lot of events. It's like a beautiful place to have weddings, and so that's a big industry here. But we found just like personally that neither of us were that interested in doing that work. I will make like arches for friends still. Like I do that. Like usually I do like one a year for a friend who's getting married. But professionally, I kind of just am not interested enough to like work with the brides, and it's just so much. So even though the markup is great on event work, it wasn't for me. So we have transitioned to a product that we call our DIY bucket of blooms, where you can purchase basically like bulk blooms to make your own arrangements at your event, whether it's your
Nice.
wedding or like a bridal shower, or people use them for like birthday parties and kids parties, flower crown making workshops. So that has been a positive shift for us because we are trying to more attract the customers who are looking for like the wildflower, like bright colors, summer farm vibes, and not people who are like, I need white roses, because like that's not what we grow. So that's not what you're going to get from us.
You
Yeah.
still want that?
Yeah, I know. Yeah. So that's like now we do have the flower CSAs still. We have some specialty crops like ranunculus and dahlias.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Do you know ranunculus?
No.
I
I
should
can't
send you
even
a
pronounce
picture.
that.
I know, they're so fun. Ranunculus were my like funny story about ranunculus is that they're a spring flower that are kind of prefer like a Mediterranean climate. They actually are related to buttercup. That is the family they're in. And we are they're kind of a challenging flower because they would really like to have this like, long cold season but never freeze. And so we were like we but our very first year in 2019, I had a one of my best friends from high school was getting married in May. And I was like, we let us do your flowers. And now I look back at this and I'm like, that was insane. Like I was like, because if you like now when I know like annual flowers in New England don't really get going until like almost July, like because
Yeah.
flowers have a really long time to get going. And so I was just like, oh, May, no problem. Like, oh, ranunculus, never grown those before. That'll be fine. But we, started experimenting with ranunculus that very first year because it just was a crop that I was excited about and I was excited to grow them for this really special person in my life. Um, and so now they have a lot of, I feel really personally like I love ranunculus because I have a lot of affection for them. And we kind of pulled it off that first year. Like I did her bridal bouquet, I did a little arch, and
Oh, they're
we
beautiful. I'm
aren't,
looking at them now. Oh,
yeah, they're
wow. They're
amazing.
beautiful.
Yeah, I call them the croissant of flowers because they have all those wonderful like ruffles.
Oh, they're beautiful. Very
Yeah,
nice.
so we now those have become a crop that we're known for around here, and they have extremely long vase life because those petals just like bloom open for like weeks on your table. And but now we've learned that if you can like, and we have the infrastructure to like overwinter them in a greenhouse. So I was actually just looking at them today. We have like ranunculus that we planted in December that were kept in our like climate battery greenhouse all winter, which I can talk more about, and they'll bloom in like April. Yeah.
Wow. Beautiful. Absolutely
Yeah.
beautiful. Before we talk about the greenhouse, talk to me about your CSA. So,
Oh
what
yeah.
does it look like today? Your vegetable, excuse me, CSA.
Yeah. Yeah. So this year we are planning on having at least 150 CSA members, hopefully.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's
Yes.
great.
Yeah, last year we've been on in general, the farm has been on a trajectory of growth, and that's not something we want to keep forever, but like we have been, consistently trying to be able to raise our wages for our employees, raise our take-home pay for us as owners. And so until we can get the farm to a place that can sustain like livable wages for everyone who works there, we're continuing to grow. And we the CSA continues to just be our priority for sales outlets, because I people I guess your customer or your listeners probably know what CSA is, but CSA stands for Community Supported Agriculture, and it means that we can have a direct relationship with the people who are eating our produce, and they can have a direct relationship with us. So we have implemented a sliding scale payment system for our CSA. It just gives us like a lot more control because we can like that's just we as a farm decided like using some information from other farms how the sliding scale can work so people choose what they can pay based on like their income level and access to wealth and resources. And then the idea is that instead of that being like a charity model where the farm is making less, hopefully some people are also opting to pay higher than retail value. And so those like offset each other. So that we also accept SNAP benefits as a uh, form of payment.
Good.
And Yeah, so the CSA just kind of gives us the most control over like being able to offer those things to customers and is yeah, offer the different locations. Like it just means that we have a lot of access to, communicating with people and hopefully like meeting them where they're at in terms of
Yeah,
like where they can pick up, what they can pay, things like that.
exactly. And question, you have, I know there was, where was it? There are organizations you work with.
Hmm.
Are you like Berkshire? You had written on the website Berkshire Food. Oh my, it doesn't
Project.
project. For some reason,
Yep.
I wrote product.
No
Project,
worries.
Heart and Soil Collective, Friendship Center. So, do you work with them on a CSA model basis, or are you literally, because I know like with Heart and Soil, they have farmers in their collective,
Hmm.
and the farmers are paid to provide vegetables.
Hmm.
So, just tell me about those relationships and how you've worked that out.
Yeah. So from the beginning, we kind of sought out nonprofits to work with for the food access work because as a for-profit business, we can only do so much fundraising and we needed to be paid for what we were growing.
Yeah.
So we basically work with organizations who they are fundraising and they are applying for grants that then fund us bringing food to food access locations. So Berkshire Food Project and the Friendship Center are both like food pantries / meal access sites in North Adams. And we get paid through Berkshire Grown to bring veggies there. So people in North Adams are able to eat or bring home veggies from our farm for free. We're getting paid as much as we need to. And, Berkshire Grown is working with like state and federal grants to make that happen.
Yeah, I had an interview with Margaret. I've actually met her in person. And yeah, we were talking about a lot of that. And I know obviously there are concerns about those grants and what's going to happen. But I know she's extremely innovative, and so is everybody else working in these fields. So we'll figure it out.
Yep.
The CSA model is working. It sounds like it's growing.
Mm-hmm.
We were on the same time. I remember the first year was like 30. The second year we had a big swing up to almost like 65, 70. And then we swung up over 100. Like we had 125 the third year. And I was like, oh man, my daughters were great help. They knew every one of my CSA customers and they had all these relationships formed. It was a lot of fun. So, and then the flowers, and so you have these buckets and you have a CSA for the flowers.
Mm-hmm.
Any other stream, any other way, any other revenue sources that you guys have created on the farm?
That's really it. We do a handful of other events. Like in addition to the buckets, we do some like holiday markets.
Okay.
Mostly with flowers or dried flowers. And we also do some wholesale vegetables to local restaurants and grocers.
Great.
So,
Okay.
and organizations like the North Adams Public Schools. So, yeah, we still do pretty regular wholesale. It's not a huge percent of the business. It's under 20% total of the business, but all of our produce is, sold within a 20-mile radius of the farm.
That's
And
good.
we tend to work with chefs who are really invested in like changing their menus to fit what's local. So, we tend not to be the person who's, being like giving the burger place lettuce every week, but we're the place who's like giving the taco place broccolini for their one broccolini taco. And like, that's the kind of chef who's like the person who's excited to change the menu based on getting my wholesale email is like who tends to work with us.
That's terrific.
Yeah,
That's great.
so that's been a great outlet for us and like provided some really great relationships, but is like largely not who we're planning the crop plan around, is more like a good outlet for sales that are like beyond what we can sell at market. Yeah, I feel like that kind of also like we have a relatively diverse revenue streams, and like I think that comes from our time at Kitchen Garden learning. We just worked for Caroline, who was like, oh, we're going to sell that. I'll find someone to buy that, and like that has kind of been the ethos. And I do think that has helped us in like, even though we are a CSA farm, we aren't opposed to like being creative and really like wanting to sell everything that we're growing. Oh, I know we're jumping around a little, but I was just
That's
thinking
okay.
about the question you asked around like diversity and CSA. And that's something that we've thought more about in the last couple of years because we got some funding through Berkshire Agricultural Ventures to work with I guess, financial advisor is what I would call him, who helped us to make a cost of production sheet for like, in theory, every crop. So we could use the tools that he gave us to track how much it costs to grow a pound of carrots, a pound of mixed greens.
Right.
And then we can use that to compare crops and to see like, what are we making money on? What are we losing money on? And so, after we did that process with him, like we really looked at our crops and, did decide to make some kind of tough decisions around cutting some crops. Like at our scale, we're under 2 acres. We are working at a hand scale mostly. So we have a tractor that can like move mulch and move compost, but the tractor doesn't go into the beds. So we're planting at a hand scale, like we're broad forking, we're harvesting at a hand scale. And so all of that means that there are just some crops that like don't make sense. And we ended up cutting most of our like storage roots. So last year we made an effort to sell like all of our roots as fresh bunches instead of like going into fall with lots of like bulk roots, because basically at our size and with our practices, like we were almost losing money by growing storage roots. And, that means like, oh, we don't give our CSA potatoes, but we've just kind of decided that like that those sacrifices are okay. And we just like, we kind of balance like, there's a world where we're just a cherry tomato dahlia farm because those crops like pay the best, but like we don't want to be that either. So like, where is the balance of like, I don't want to grow potatoes because it actually costs me more it costs less to buy potatoes from a different farm than it does to grow the potatoes ourselves. So, we've made some tough choices. And I think like as a CSA, we kind of brand ourselves as like being a place where you can get your staples. People like being able to get like things that they're familiar with and they don't mind getting them frequently, like lettuce, tomato.
That's what we found.
Yeah, like they like what they like they don't necessarily need like we still grow diversity, like we grow fennel and like little things here and there, but honestly like people are not needing that like all the time. So
you usually have to inspire them with some ideas what to do with it. But that's okay. You want to mix it up a little bit, but we found that we stuck to the staples and people were really happy. And that's why we also broke out the spring, summer, and fall, because some of those greens you get, the amazing greens you might get in May, in the earlier, season, and even in the fall, certain people were just like, no, too many for me. And it made it for our target market, it just people seemed happier with what they were getting. So you really have to learn, it looks like you've done a lot, you guys have done a lot of work with figuring that out, and that'll evolve every year.
Exactly.
But that's what you have to do. You have to fine tune the model. So tell me about the greenhouse. You mentioned the greenhouse.
Oh yeah. We got a grant 4 years ago now to install our first heated space on the farm. So
who was that from, the grant?
It was a state grant through FSIG, which I'm not going to be able to pull what that stands for. But,
I'll look it up. Don't worry.
Yeah, it's a Massachusetts grant. And we applied for not just the above soil, like poly a plastic greenhouse, but also to install a climate battery underneath. So
That's interesting.
a climate battery is kind of like a simplified geothermal. Basically, it works by using the thermal energy that's stored in soil already, kind of the way that like a below a subterranean basement is kind of always at that like 50 degrees, or like a root cellar. The soil under your greenhouse can achieve the same effect. You just have to figure out how to get the air from that basement up into the greenhouse itself.
Wow.
So when we installed the greenhouse, we excavated 8 feet underneath, like this huge trench underneath the footprint of the greenhouse, and laid just like pipes underneath. It's just like a simple fan system. So fans from one side of the greenhouse blow through the pipes that are under the soil, and then that blow that air back up into the greenhouse on the other side. And
Wow.
in the winter, that air is warmer than the air in outside. So
Wow.
yeah. So this year, like I would say we're still figuring out like its optimal usage, because right now that's also the only space where we have a propane heater. So that the climate battery can keep the greenhouse, somewhere between 32 and 50. Like it's never going to be warmer than it is below ground. So there are a lot of crops that will thrive between 32 and 50, like ranunculus. So this winter we overwintered, 5 beds of ranunculus in there completely without propane.
Wow,
And
that's great.
yeah, so
That works out really well.
exactly, it makes that product a lot more sustainable. And I think in the future, the whole greenhouse will be dedicated to crops that like that temperature range. But currently, we also use that greenhouse to start, tomatoes for this, so that we can have early season tomatoes for CSA. But tomatoes want to be at like 70 degrees. And
Right.
so when we have tomatoes in there, we have to use the propane heater to get them started. So we actually just turned the propane heat on like last week, because we're starting to get our tomatoes going in that space. But eventually, when we have other heated spaces, I'm hoping that the climate battery like is even more useful.
That's
For like cold
interesting.
season crops. Yeah.
Very interesting. So when you got the grant, and I presume, was there a company that specialized in that?
Yes. Yeah. So we worked with a ag extension organization out of, I believe, Pennsylvania. So yeah, we did not design the climate battery. Like there were amazing like engineers who kind of figured out like what is the optimal like placement of the tubes to like use the thermal matter of the soil. So we basically just like bought plans. But the cool thing is that it was very simple to install, because it is literally just like plastic tubing. So we bought these like plans, but Laura and I did the installation. So we hired
Wow. I'm
we hired
impressed.
a local plumbing organization to do the digging. So we had a big excavator on site, and then Laura and I were like in the trench, like making this, I call it like tube lasagna, because we like make the tubes in the right place, and then he would put 2 feet of soil, and then we would make the tubes, and then he would put soil. So it's like this fun, like ZD of thermal
That's terrific.
energy.
That is terrific. Excellent. Well, I just have two final questions for you. So I think I know the one answer. So what is your favorite flower? Which I think I know the answer to that. And then vegetable. What is
Yeah.
your favorite vegetable that you grow?
Okay. Yeah. Great question. So yeah, I will go with the ranunculus. You'll have to like post a picture of it with the podcast, because
I definitely will.
they just remind me of this like our starting out and having a lot of hope that like they're gonna work, and then just feeling also, because it's been fun to have them become a bit associated with our brand. Like people often don't know this flower and get to know it through us, and they're like so beautiful and special. So I really love that I get to introduce people to this flower. And then yeah, vegetable, that's a fun one. I think like I definitely love snap peas. Snap peas have always been my favorite like garden snack. So yeah, I'll go with snap peas. They're just like a fun, like fleeting, like seasonal snack that I like always miss once they're gone.
I was going to say, and then they're early in the season, so it kind of,
Mhm.
it's like, oh, they're back, we're back into
Yes.
farming season.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's not a coincidence that both of those items are spring crops because that's when you really appreciate your farm is when
Yes.
it's like you've gone all winter without flowers and without fresh veggies. So,
Excellent. Well, thank you. This has been a pleasure getting to know you and getting to know your journey so far. It's a great journey. It
yeah,
really
thank you so
is.
much.
So impressive.
Thank you. Yeah, it was so fun to talk and I'm so excited to hear the episode come out and yeah, please let us know too. I'd love to like share it with CSA members. So,
Excellent. I hope our AgriTourist podcast prompts you to think more about where your food comes from, whether it be your vegetables, fruits, meats, and even those sweet treats. Don't forget to subscribe and share this podcast with someone you think may truly benefit from or be inspired by it. Visit us at agra-tourist.com. Until next time. So I was recently listening to one of the Grounded in Maine podcasts produced by Amy Fagan. The podcast is an open conversation about being mindful about how we show up in the world. It's focused on sustainability and how sustainability impacts every part of our life. What are some of the most important takeaways that people will get from your podcast?
One of the things that I hope that people will take away from the podcast is encouragement. Like, I want them to not feel like you have to spend thousands of dollars to be part of the solution because, there are a lot of sustainable, things that say sustainability or sustainable, like solar panels or organic cotton and stuff like that. Like, some things are just more expensive because they have that tagline, that phrase or whatever. But there are so many ways that you can be sustainable. You just have to be a little bit creative. And so I'm putting out all these ideas that what people are doing just to put the thought out there that we can all be part of it without going broke.
So how can people find your podcast?
My podcast is wherever podcasts are found. It is just called Grounded in Maine. I also have my Instagram is where I am most active, and the Instagram handle is Grounded in Maine Podcasts.